have, assuming that we're all in good shape here, just so that everybody knows, we're videoing this discussion, but it's pointed at me, not at other people. So, and the reason that we're videoing it is that I'm going to put it on the internet as well as talk about it. And so we're going to basically invited everyone who's interested, and I'm going to post it online, and I do get a lot of hits online, I have to say that, talking about the proposed tax levies and the tax increase that Macedonia is proposed for November 8th. Just to identify myself, I'm Sylvia Hanneken. I'm a councilwoman in Macedonia, and just a little background, I'm retired from the Department of Defense, where I had quite a long career, and I was a program manager there, so the kinds of planning that I expect to see for things where we have large expenditures involved are partly influences my view of quite a bit of this. Let me just talk to a couple of aspects of it. Just basically, what are these levies? And the levies come down to two different 0.25% levies, both of them producing 1.05 million annually. And there's a different span on these levies. One is for 10 years, one is for 20 years. And in looking at that level of, that kind of span, a 10-year span is probably not unusual. A 20-year span on something like this with so many unknowns makes it difficult because you are keeping this going for such a long time and you have a lot of unpredictable results. So what this does, basically, these two issues being on the ballot together, if they both pass, that puts our income tax rate in Macedonia at 2.25%. And Macedonia and most of the surrounding communities in Summit County, Akron being an exception, have a 2% tax rate. In fact, that is the most common tax rate in the Rita tax area in Northeast Ohio and in Middle Ohio. There are some cities that have 1.5%, some that have 1.75%, and some that have above 2%, but the most predominant one is the 2%. Now, one of the things that I want to talk to is how do we know, having understood that this is the big picture issue, how do we know what our need is? Because that's what you always start with when you're thinking about expending money. What are we starting with? Why do we think we need this amount of money? And we have a recommendation from our city engineer, and currently the city engineer is Cuyahoga Valley Engineering. It was GPD, and what they are recommending in this levy is $1 million, give or take. It's a little over $1 million annually for road maintenance. And I provided some information which I'm going to be posting. You will see this briefing on the internet if you want to look at more detail. But the roads in our city were given a complete paving condition assessment, and that was done by GPD. It was done in 2015, reported to the council in June of 2015. And it's been updated in November of last year due to the fact that we paved some roads last year, obviously. And so at this time, the condition of the roads is what you see here, which is the total dedicated roads we have are 214 roads. And you can see that we've got, obviously, and everybody who's driven on some of our roads, 17.8% are in what's called very poor, poor, or fair to poor, which is a significant amount of roadway. 18.7 is in quote-unquote fair condition, And then we have 64% that are in good or very good condition. Now, this is actually a higher number than the original study that was done in May of last year because we paved some roads. And obviously, we're repaving 82, which also makes for, you know, one of our main roadways as being repaved. Now, looking at the picture in terms of Macedonia, Macedonia needs to be paying attention to that maintenance recommendation the engineers talked about, because that has been a consistent problem. We haven't had a consistent program of maintaining roads, which involves making sure you crack seal, making sure you do full depth repairs, making sure that you don't allow collapse of berms and that kind of thing, which creates additional problems. We've had a spotty history of doing that for various reasons, one of which was we didn't have a consistent view of what we wanted to do with these roads, I believe. That's the primary reason. And a lot of money has been committed to other projects, like the rec center and the City Hall building, so that has also affected what we can do. As far as all the roads in Macedonia, there are quite a few roads that are not under Macedonia maintenance plans. Those roads are in primarily our homeowners association areas. Not all the HOAs do not have dedicated roads, but there's quite a few of them that actually maintain their own roads and their own driveways and other things. And I've listed them here. I'm just going to read them off. Spring Hill, Spruce Crossings, Villas at Taormina, except the Miglerini Way, Villa Lago, Arbor Trails, Valley Creek Estates, Tuscany, Greystone, and Woodland Point. So there's quite a few roads in Macedonia where people are currently maintaining their own roads through their HOAs. So when they look at something like this, they're saying, yeah, these main roads, it's really important, but many of them are saying, how come I can't get my roads to maintain? It creates a conflict. And it creates a question, why aren't we consistently approaching how we're maintaining roads? Because some of these HOAs have much better roads than we do inside Macedonia, and that's because they do a more consistent maintenance. As far as stormwater is concerned, I want to emphasize one thing. We have for years built in ways that has been damaging to the people at the bottom of the hill. And that has created this problem because prior to probably about 10 years ago, from what I can see, there was very little attention paid to the impacts of stormwater change. When you build new homes, you build new buildings, and obviously water goes somewhere when you put an impervious surface in front of it. And so the people down at the ledge in North Bedford, and there have been areas over like off of Valley View and Eileen area where water, because of other construction, is now rolling downhill. And we do have Indian Creek Watershed, which also is producing a lot of water depending on the general water situation inside Northeast Ohio. Now, there's been a radical change in financing for stormwater. For years, we just did whatever we could. We have done some projects in the last few years to address stormwater issues, but we have not done a consistent thing about stormwater, and we haven't had a good program to make sure that stormwater doesn't get worse. So what we're doing right now is Northeast Ohio Sewer District is now collecting money from about 6 communities inside of Summit County, as well as most of Cuyahoga County. And they have agreed to collect, in case of Macedonia, from every business and every residence, about $906,000 annually. That's the game plan that they have. That's the estimate they provided to us. When I asked them in June, I asked them for a specific estimate, and then I said, how do we go ahead and we are due a community share, which is 25% of everything they collect. Now remember, there's a couple things about Macedonia and this community share. Macedonia asked for that. that was part of negotiations with NERSD because we objected to them collecting any fee whatsoever. And of course, there were a lot of communities challenging the authority of NERSD, and that's been settled in the Ohio Supreme Court. They have the authority. This happened late last year. So what we're dealing with now is there is going to be a steady amount of money that is collected, whether we like it or not, and many people have told me they don't like it. Nonetheless, 75% of it is going to central NERSD projects, and 25% is going to Macedonia. So the number that they've given us is around $225,000. It depends on if everybody pays, all of that, but what it comes right down to is this. It's like a tax, and it's probably, for many people, is probably doubling their Macedonia property tax. And the Macedonian property tax is very low. Typical home probably pays in the range of 110, maybe a half. And this is probably going to double that. But nonetheless, not for everybody. Some people will have a much lower number. So, but just to be aware, this is like a tax. You have to pay it, period. When we look at Parks and Rec, and that's another whole area. I checked back into how we originally built the recreation center, and there was some resistance. And the time it was passed back in 1997, if you can believe, 20 years ago, almost. In 1997, it passed by around 50 votes. It was that close. Because it's an expensive building. It was the most expensive building we have built, more expensive than City Hall. And so when we look back, what are we wanting to do with the park areas, and what do we know about it? So I've listed here, because I pulled this right off of our Macedonia Recreation Center Park Survey. There's a briefing on that that's online. And I looked at every response we had on the major areas. And I was trying to figure out how many people listed certain activities as important or very important. The other responses you could give were neutral, not important, and I don't care about it, period, basically. And so I tried to figure out what it is. Now remember, there's a problem with this sample because it was distributed through the Recreation Center and it was distributed to members primarily. So it's not a typical sample, unbiased sample of Macedonia residents. But, so about 4.5% of the Macedonia residents actually answered this survey, and they're primarily, I would, just based on where it was distributed and how, are primarily members of the Recreation Center already. But here's what they said. Of the various people who responded, 494 of these people said that they wanted to have an outdoor pool, and walking trails also came in very high, which we've already done some of them. Gym and basketball, more towards the center of, but still above 50%, and the splash park idea, just slightly above 50%. Those are the things that people responded to who are actually went to look at the survey. I am thinking that, just based on my own experience in trying to deal with these kinds of surveys, this survey is extremely weak in looking at the whole problem because it doesn't explain how this is going to be financed. It doesn't explain that the situation may be that this will add to the operational costs, and where are we getting the money for additional operational costs. So there's a lot of issues with, would you like to have something without putting any detail to it about how we're going to do it and who's going to pay for what. So let's just talk briefly about what revenues are available to support the roads and the stormwater levies. We have a reduction in our debt due to the end of the construction debt for the recreation center and city hall, which were both quite expensive. That's NUSD is now going to be bringing in money to us that, like it or not, we're going to get. And so what are the elements? Where are the funds available? So we're getting a reduction in debt. We're getting more money in from basically the Macedonia residents and businesses through that NUSD fee. And this totals in and of itself over $1 million. So if we're looking at where do we need to deploy funds, we need to do that, and then we need to look at everything we're spending money on and determine whether its priority is higher than the concerns we have about roads and the concerns we have about whether we need a pool. In terms of the revenues available over here, we don't really have we have no cost model on what it's going to cost to build an aquatic park facility. And I looked around to try to find some about outdoor pool areas, and between that and what I know was the original estimate on redoing the trails, I believe that it's reasonable to assume that it's less than $3 million to do those specific things. Now, $21 million is being asked for from our taxpayer over 20 years. And I'm just saying this very carefully to people. There isn't $21 million worth of investment that we need to make in this facility yet. There's nothing showing that, and I don't think when we look at priorities that we would say we know for sure that the priority is to dedicate 12.5% of our income to this specific project, the recreation center and park issues. Now, can we expend some? Absolutely. Should we? Yes. But we haven't formed a real plan in how to do this. Now, I just looked at, there are a couple of areas around here that are in fact building recreation centers, and the Summit County Development Finance Authority actually is issuing bonds, and they don't have dedicated funding for any of this, for these particular areas. They are simply using their general fund money to pay off this bond, which is going to be 25 years. So I'm saying there are other ways to finance things that we think are very important, and we don't have to have $1 million over 20 years to do that. So I guess what I'm summarizing what I'm saying about all this, we can afford to pay for regular road and stormwater program, but we need to have priorities strictly established and followed. Recreations parks need a regular capital flow, just like a lot of what we're doing needs that. But we need a disciplined plan. We don't have it yet, in my opinion. And I do believe that based on what I've seen, the analysis of the financials we do have enough funds to take care of the critical issues, including our roads and some enhancements to the park. And what we need to do is be thinking about how we actually work as a city with all different opinions involved to put together keeping our tax rate at 2%, but investing in all the things that we think are essential. Now, is there a possibility we have to have a specifically directed tax for 5 years to pay for a pool or an aquatic complex? Yes, it's possible, depending on what else we have to do in terms of right priorities. If that's the case, we can do that. But these general scoop up of money for 20 years doesn't make sense to me. That's why I've opposed these specific tax levies. Now, I did offer, and I want to emphasize this, I offered an alternative to continue our tax rate at 2%. Remember, next year our tax rate would revert to 1.75, if we did nothing. And I believe we do need to keep it at 2% because of what's happened in the intervening years. But remember, for the last 20 years, we've been operating with 2% of your income, and we have built the railroad bridge, we built bridge over 82, we built the highway connection for Highland Road there, we got that overpass. We've widened 82. All of these cost Macedonians money. Don't let people tell you that it doesn't cost you money if ODOT's working on it. It almost always costs us at least 20% of what the total dollar number is. And sometimes we have to pay for the right-of-way costs, like we have in the case of our new northbound entrance ramp. We paid $500,000 for that. Now that's been on a SIB loan, which means that we're going to have to eventually pay this off, but it's an interest-free loan. And we will have to pay so much per year to take care of that. But those kinds of projects are not the highest priority projects anymore. We need to be looking at what's happening to our roads and what's happening to our parks and focusing our funds properly. But we've spent a lot of money in the last 20 years on these issues, and there's no evidence, in my opinion, that we need to go beyond 2%. We just need to refocus our priorities. So with that, I'm going to answer any questions from anybody who wants to talk about this. And I've talked a lot about how we do things. I just wanted to have an overview given to everyone about how, having the background that I have, I perceive how to plan out the problem here. And we need to understand what is our need, which we do have a fairly good road plan at this point coming from CVE. And then what is it that we need to do to correct the problem? How do we finance that? And I don't think we've done a good job on the recreation center side. It's in a very early formative stage, thinking it through. We're going to have pictures here pretty soon, I'm sure, but we don't have a solid financial plan. We don't have a membership financing plan. All of those things that really have to be done to understand what it's going to cost us and how much we want to invest. So, anybody have something they want to confront on? I'd be happy to do that.
What's the revenue currently for the rec center from its membership?
Membership revenue is a little above 500,000. I have to go back and look at my numbers, but the total amount is somewhere between 750. That includes programs where we charge people for yoga and various things. So it's around 750 to 770 annually that we're getting out of that. Now we're paying more for operations than we're actually collecting. Okay. And, there's different views of that. I would say, based on the numbers I've seen in the last few years, it's somewhere around 300 to 350 that we've consistently had an issue of the operational costs being higher. Let me say something about operational costs. The first rule you have in any business, and certainly in any government entity, is not just what does it cost now, but what do we need to do to produce what we want to have, which is a vibrant recreation center, and what do we need to do about people costs, about other kinds of costs that are driving what we're doing. And we're not, in my opinion, focused enough on that issue. And I think we need to be, because if we're going to spend another 20 years subsidizing the recreation center at that level without any consideration of how to address those costs, the chances are very good that it's going to escalate. That when you add other facilities in there, it's going to cost more to operate, for sure. How do we know we've got a membership plan that's going to pay for that?
Well, my point is, in a business plan, this is not cost effective for the city.
Right.
So
I get you, and we need to have a much closer and tighter view of what it is that we're trying to do, because then we can properly cost it we can see what it's going to take in terms of operating. For example, if you have an aquatic complex, there's a lot of people that are going to have to be involved. And that means we've got to pay for them, how long it's going to be open, that kind of thing. Let me tell you another thing here that's very important, which is when we talk about, you know, tax money, and, oh, it's only going to cost me X, well, it may not affect me if I have to pay $200 more for a specific area. But you're actually, when you're voting, you're bringing everybody into the mix. People who can't afford it, people who can and are not interested, and people who, hey, this is an important thing. I think it's very difficult to understand. It's not like it's a charity, like you're going to volunteer time and you're going to volunteer your money. It's when you vote for a tax, you're voting to have everybody pay more, period. That's it. So if somebody can't afford it, not interested in it, they're going to be affected just as much as you are. And I don't think we should do that lightly. We may have to do it. I'm not against all taxes, obviously. We have to have roads, we have to have, and if you're looking at the federal government, we need a defense. We have to have Defense Department, we've got to have other things. So what it doesn't say, though, is that we should do it lightly, or that we should just kind of say, oh, I'm not worried about it because I can spend a couple hundred more, 300 more, whatever it is. I think we ought to be concerned about it because we ought to be concerned about our neighbors. And that's what I look at when I'm working on things. And the other thing that I want to make sure people understand, it's not that there is any desire to be in conflict over things. It's that I believe I'm representing you, and when I'm representing you, the residents, what I'm doing is I'm saying, what would I do and how would I approach to buy something? If I go to the car dealership and he says, oh, it's only cost you $500 more, and don't worry about it because we'll wash the car, I found that I say to people, well, I don't care if you wash my car, but here's my dollar amount. And that's the way I approach everything in life when I'm buying something. And that's what we're doing here. We're buying something. And if you are not that kind of person and you say, oh, what the heck? Well, then that's you. But I think most people expect their representatives to look at these things from their standpoint, not from what, you know, some friend thinks or whatever. And that's what I'm trying to do to represent our public here. And that's the only thing that's going on here. And I think if we reject these levies, we do not close the rec center, we do not do anything that is going to harm any part of our process. We sit down and we figure out how we want to approach our taxes and how we want to appropriate money. That's what we do. And I'm perfectly willing to do it. Anybody else have questions that they want to have addressed?
Are you saying that we're running a $350,000 to $400,000 yearly deficit
In operational costs,
in operational
yes.
cost at
Yes,
the
we
rec
are.
center?
That's what I would say is closer to 350, yeah.
So what happens if at the end of June and we don't pass this levy? How are we paying for
Well,
that?
we need to be working right now on what is it that's driving these costs? And one of the things that's obvious is you need more members. You have to have more members if you're going to properly pay for operations. And one of the arguments that's made is, oh, we need to have a new aquatic area and be more up to date to be able to attract new members. And there is some truth to that. You can't just let things die and then expect to be attractive. You can't. However, before you think about how you're going to do that, remember right now your management level of operations is not even close to covering your costs. And that's a problem because when you add more facilities, what says you're not going to have a worse problem?
Has the city at any time done some sort of feasibility study where they sent out a survey to all the residents of the city, asking them what would they want to see in the recreation center for them to become members? And as a
Okay.
follow-up to that, has this administration done any study to understand what it needs to do to attract further members to make the recreation center a break-even proposition?
Well, I would say the attempt through that survey was to try to come up with, let me go back to what happened. In the original recreation center levy, they promised a pool, okay? What was not clear is what kind of pool, inside, outside, or all of it. But if you looked at the actual ordinance, which I did recently to find out, it actually said indoor pool in the whereases clauses, which mean nothing, by the way. Those are informational. In the actual language in the ordinance that went onto the ballot, it said a pool. So a lot of people have said to me, they said we were going to have a pool, and we don't have, we knew it was supposed to be an outdoor pool, and we don't have one. I think there was a certain amount of confusion, okay? So you have people who say, well, we already paid for that. We already paid for that the last 20 years. We paid for a pool. But what we paid for was to get the rec center up and running, build a building, get it up and running, and set a tone on operations of where we were going to be. And the problem is, we're pretty far behind the 8 ball in terms of financing our regular day-to-day activities. We can enhance that, perhaps, but our biggest problem is going to be attracting new members and ensuring that we financially make sense. Now, we did a couple years ago raise the price to members who were not inside Macedonia, who were not Macedonia residents, and I think that backfired, actually. That we lost memberships to other areas. And I have actually, someone came to the previous meeting that we had on all of these issues and said, I'm not sure that we're, we're not getting value added because sometimes the rec center, when I go in there, the bathrooms aren't clean, we don't have soap in the dispensers, etc. So, and the locker rooms aren't clean, and this and that. Those kinds of issues. Those are the kind of things that we need to be asking ourselves and talking to residents about, not just members, about what it is that really brings people in. I've had residents, young families, tell me they can't afford the rec center. They just can't afford it. It's too expensive. When they're looking at their total budget, they can't afford to buy a membership. And the simple reason is not everybody has $350 of disposable income or whatever it's going to be. So we've got to think, how can we actually, if we're still going to be charging these rates and we're going to add features, how is this going to lead to more people wanting to join the rec center? Unless we know for sure that's a winner and we can do it. I don't think we've got a sufficient plan together to look at that yet. I do agree we need to get beyond a survey that we're handing out at the rec center or that we're posting online. There are some ways to do surveys that we could do that would ask about not only would you like this, but if it cost us this much, does that affect your opinion? Because people always like things in general. I'd like an Audi, but I don't have an Audi. I have a CRV. And the reason is very simple. It's not worth it to me to spend the extra $25,000 to be in an Audi, or 30 or 40 or whatever it's going to be. So I think that's what we need to get applied here. Really getting our customer base, which are the residents. Believe me, we have lots of outside people coming into this. About half of our memberships are from the outside and half are from Macedonia. What we need to do is think about Macedonians fundamentally are the taxpayers. So they've got to be the ones well satisfied. So we could do things like doing a mailer, try to get it the cheapest price we can, but asking every Macedonia resident to come back to us and tell us on this card. But we have to have a way of verifying that these are actually Macedonians, and that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. So, but it might be that we'd send them a key on their email address and have them write it on the card or something. It's possible. We need to think about it because I don't think we've got a good way of handling the problem that you're describing. Any others? Yes?
First off, just really appreciative that you take a couple hours out on your Saturday to come out here and talk to the community. At least that's several that,
Yeah, right.
that are interested in it. I'm glad I came. A lot of facts that you presented. I'm glad to hear that you do support Parks and Rec. You do support roads. You think that there's a regular capital flow that needs to happen to replace and enhance the features.
Right.
I think the only difference is discipline and the level of funding. So glad to hear all that. What I wanted to hear a little bit more of
Yes.
is I understand your position is no on 18 and 19.
Mhm.
So let's say we vote no on 18 and 19. We've got a whole year that we've got to plan, put something else on the ballot. What is your plan that you would offer then for
Well,
next year when we have another chance to?
Actually, we don't have to wait a year. In fact, the original rec center levy passed in May.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, it did. Because they had a problem previously with it, and they were unable to successfully get it through. So they went back and, they worked on it. Fundamentally, we can do something before June. We need to communicate to our residents. I really believe that many, for example, when I talk to people, I have heard people talk about an outside aquatic area of some kind, not necessarily an Olympic pool. And I think that's an important question because an Olympic pool plus aquatic animals and all that, I don't know whether that makes sense, but certainly an aquatic area outside where grandma can take the grandkids for a few hours, to me, that would be possible, doable. We ought to be thinking about it. We ought to be thinking about the building itself. Someone has said to me, I don't know how many people have said in my presence, the building was not architected to utilize the space properly. That's been something said over and over, and having been in other recreation centers, I agree with that. There's a lot of dead space there that shouldn't be there. But that's water over the dam. We can't fundamentally change the structure of that building. Maybe we can do some things to enhance how we're doing things with that building, but fundamentally, we need to keep it very clean. It has to be responsive to people. I do think that sometimes I see multiple people sitting at the front desk. Maybe our check-in system is too crude. Maybe we need to have something where, there can be somebody there to screen, but we don't need 3 or 4 people hanging around. And there's a lot of emphasis on making sure this looks good. And I know that for the first attempt to put landscaping in front of that thing a year and a half ago was such a disaster that whenever I would go in there, I would say, I have to go rip out those plants. Those are really ugly. So they've done a little bit more now, and it looks better. But how things look is very important too. The feeling of it when you get in there. Cleanliness, cheerfulness, brightness, that can help. But it's expensive to run these things. And when I have residents who are parents of smaller children who would like to be able to join, and they tell me I just can't afford it, then I'm thinking, gosh, what are we doing? We've got to be thinking.
It ends up becoming a choice, right? Do you spend $300 to go to the rec center, or do you spend $1,200 to Time Warner for your cable and internet?
Yeah, well, true.
becomes a choice.
And not everybody's doing what I'm doing, which is,
Right.
I have DirecTV, I have, I know what you're saying, and it's expensive.
So I guess my question is, I heard you say you're for keeping the rate at 2%.
Yes.
So voting no on 18 and 19 takes us to 175.
No, it doesn't unless we don't have another, we do have to do something
Right.
about our current rate. I agree.
So let's say we vote no on 18 and 19, we go back down to 175.
No, we don't want to do that. I offered something in August, I don't know if you were there.
So that's what I want to hear is what do we do in the meantime so that in May, there's a
Well,
clear
I
plan for
actually
something?
offered legislation during that emergency series of meetings where we placing this stuff on the ballot. And I said, I do believe we ought to keep it at 2%. I believe we need a capital 0.25%. I was offering to have a predominant amount on the roads and a lesser amount on rec center, parks. And that was rejected by the majority. But I believe that's what we should do, because I think we can keep and we can put it on in May, we can keep this at 2%, but we gotta have some ability to talk about what is it that's essential. I believe the roads are, certainly, a regular maintenance plan on these roads is essential. And we need to then look at not only the regular maintenance plan, but what do we need to do on the repaving elements of certain roads. Certain roads are important key roads. And I can tell you that a lot of people drive on, although it's hard to know what a key road is anymore in Macedonia, given what's going on. Every road has been blocked for, and people are going crazy trying to figure out where to go. I think when our traffic gets back to some sort of open traffic, then what we need to look at is not only what are the worst roads, but what are the roads that our residents are really driving on a lot. And we need to make sure those are up to speed, because that is creating a wrong impression in some cases. We have repaved South Bedford, as you're aware, a couple of years ago. That was completely done the wrong way. We have wasted the money that we spent there. In my opinion, it's going to be a cow pasture in another 5 years. And it's because it's disintegrating again in certain areas. They are crack sealing this time, different than before, but it's a problem. And that's another thing we need to do. Have I answered what?
Yeah, I was curious of what your plan was, because it does sound, what's new to me is it does sound you're for the rec center, you're for parks, you're for roads in a different way.
Yes,
this is too
correct.
much, and we don't have the discipline in place just yet.
Right,
But
exactly.
in May, we could do something different.
Yes, correct. I believe that because, and believe me, the reason that you may not know exactly what I think is because sometimes in the council meetings it's difficult to articulate that because of countervailing forces. Anybody else have something like, yeah?
Okay, just to kind of clarify, the 2%. If this doesn't pass, we're still at 2%.
We are.
Up through next June.
Correct.
All right. And even though the debt will be paid off for the rec center and
They'll still be accumulating into.
right, and for the city hall at the end of this year.
Right.
We're still going to be paying on into that for the first 6 months of
Correct,
next year.
for the rest
So there'll
of it.
be money coming in there.
There will
for
be
the rec
money
center.
coming in. What we need to do is look at how to redirect funds towards capital investment that we need. Remember, we have run all this since 1997 when we had 1.75%. Our total operation of the city on 1.75%. The other thing I would point out is 1.2% back in the mid-2000s was getting us around $7 million annually in income tax. It is now getting us closer to $8.5 million. So we've had a boost in what we're getting just from the same tax rate. And why is that? Because we have more businesses that are paying net profits tax and more employees who are working in these businesses. Now, one of the things that is really important, you see in places like Solon and in Twinsburg, they have really benefited because they have not so much emphasized retail as we have. They have emphasized manufacturing and office buildings. And you collect a lot more money out of those two types of facilities than you do from retail. Because why is that? Because retail has basically minimum wage employees. Some exceptions, but that's what you're dealing with. So 2% of a minimum wage versus 2% of $100,000, that's a big difference. So, at any rate, yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of expand on that a little bit, so that if these would pass,
Yes.
all right, then starting in January, we would go up, we'd be 2% up till the end of December.
Yeah,
Starting
and
in
then it'd be
January, we'd
2.25.
at 2.25,
Mhm.
and it would be 2.25 from that point forward.
Correct.
Correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, for 10 years,
Yeah, for 10
because,
years.
because in theory, the roads levy stops at 10, and the other one continues to 20. I personally, I think the length of these levies is, particularly the rec center levy, is far too long. It needs to be shrunk back to something, if you were talking about this, I believe that a 10-year levy at this point is the right data point for us. And, yes, you will.
So can you please tell us what your background is?
Yeah, just real briefly, I worked for the Department of Defense in, the area was in the finance area. And originally, I started out as, if you can believe it, a computer programmer. And I became a systems person a couple of years after that, and then I was asked to lead a team to do a complete transition from a major data center in Washington, D.C. into our data center in Bracknell. And because that was successful, then I got promoted, and I became the program manager, basically, which meant that I developed, I had staff that developed budget, I had staff that developed plans, and we had execution plans that were based on these things. And I had a staff that basically distributed 100 people on average among 5 cities in the United States. So I have background to understand the kind of planning on a major issue. Now, none of this is at the level of the Department of Defense, believe me. You know, you're talking in the Department of Defense, we were dealing with hundreds of million projects. This is certainly important, though, to 11,000 people, which is, you know, what we're talking about here. The people paying for this are the people who reside in Macedonia or who work in Macedonia. And, you know, everyone in this community has got to be respectful of the amount of money that they pay in taxes, because everything that they do depends on how much money they've got in their total flow of income. Any other questions? Well, I'm going to shut down for the moment then.
I have one question.
Yeah, okay.
I'm really not happy about this levy. I mean, the voters already said no once,
Okay.
and now they're trying to shove it back, down our throats again.
Right.
I'm not comfortable with the way this levy has been going. I don't trust what they're going to do with the money. I think we're being rushed to do something.
Okay.
There's a lot of things that City Hall needs to fix before I'm going to support City Hall. If the rec center is not making any money, how long do you feed a dead horse?
Well, what I said before, number one, I think it's rushed also. I will tell you that. I believe it was rushed. We should have sat down, not try to rush through something for November. That is, Mr. Engel and I both agree on that. Not everybody else did not agree, so that's where we are. And because of the deficits in the plan, and because of things like you just said, okay, we're running a deficit, significant deficit at the rec center, how is this adding or detracting from that? Here's what I think we need to do. We need to be respectful of the fact that not everybody agrees, and try to sit down and do a real walkthrough of what the alternatives might be, and try to then come to a common conclusion about how we can approach things. The way that we're operating now, for example, the mayor went ahead and applied for and did not tell any of us until September, when I had a public records request that told me that we were planning to use about $60,000 of our community share for a specific stormwater correction project. We had no idea that that was happening. And yet, at the meeting in August, when we were discussing stormwater, everybody was poo-pooing how long it'll take NERS to do anything. They had actually approved it in about 3.5 weeks. So we're having trouble with transparency. That's a major problem. If we don't tell people what's going on and share information, it becomes a major problem. Even though everyone's not going to agree, that's fine. Even though there are questions, that's fine. We should have questions. That's what our job is. But we need to have a willingness to open up the whole story and not just have some friend say this or have somebody come up and blame.
I'm also really concerned about the amount of money that's going to be generated from all this. How much of that's going to go to salary increases?
Well, here's the...
I mean, I sure
yeah.
would like to have a job at City Hall.
Well, yeah, I understand what you're saying, because when we did that emergency levy at the end of 2010 for the next 3 years, so 2011, 2012, 2013, instead of what it said in the levy on the ballot said, this is to make sure we maintain Macedonia services. And the whole thing that was sold and briefings and everything is we've had such a downturn in this recession, we can't afford to lose $1 million worth of income tax annually. And that is true. We would have had to have a major restructuring to do that. We actually, what has happened is once we got through the 2011 election, 2012, suddenly we've got back-to-back 3% increases for 2012 and 2013 for our employees. I think, I wasn't in the council then, I think that was a problem because it used money that should have been set aside, in my opinion, for only building up our war chest so that we don't face this kind of problem anymore, and to expand perhaps on some of the road issues that we have, like getting the maintenance program in place so we don't get deterioration. But instead, we spend it on employee salaries. And you have to remember one thing. What is going on this year? Why are we trying to keep fighting the idea we're going to have more money once we pay off these buildings? We are going, right now, there's probably a negotiation going on with our employees who are in bargaining units to increase there's a 3-year window that will be supported with a renegotiated set of salaries. That is going on while we're talking here. So part of the reason people do not want to talk about how we can reutilize the money we have is they are afraid they won't be able to set it aside for raises.